Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Greg Anthony here on the Investigative Journal. Welcome back on this January 30th, 2017 day on our calendar. And you're listening, like the promo said, to the alternative news. And a couple things before I get to my Jesuit quote of the day and then my monologue. Did you see the SAG Awards yesterday? Now listen, I'm a SAG member, and boy, I was embarrassed. They were pounding Trump with a sledgehammer, and most of their comments, in fact, all of them, most of them were regarding the immigration ban that I'm sure you've heard about, but they're misinformed. It is not a Muslim ban. So I'm pretty sick and tired of some of my fellow SAG members who seem to be listening to Chuck Schumer. Now, Chuck Schumer is a Democrat minority leader in the Senate, and he got on and started crying yesterday. Now, Trump came on today. He was talking to small business people in the White House, and he stated this. He said, "Boy, I'll tell you, I've known Chuck Schumer for years, and he's not the crying type." He said, "I think they're fake tears." And Trump said, "I want to know who his acting coach is." Now, boy, I'll tell you, I never heard presidents talk that way to senators in all the years that I've been following politics. And that goes back all the way years and years and many presidents. But, you know, they deserve it. And Trump is right, because they're presenting a false narrative regarding the immigration ban, and they need to be checked. All right. Secondly, Tony Alamo petitioned to free this Christian pastor who has been basically framed by the powers that be, and he's been in jail for now close to a decade, and he's got a 175-year sentence when he didn't really commit any crimes. I followed the trial, and I'm telling you, it was a travesty of justice, and he should be released. So we're working on a pardon that we're going to present to the Trump pardon attorney in the months to come, once things settle down in Washington, and try to commute his sentence. He deserves it. And on the Christian front, Trump is talking about Christian persecution in the Middle East and Africa, and wants to open the door to these people as well. They're surrounded, as we learned last week from John Levy, who's representing some of these organizations, these Christian organizations in the Middle East and Africa. And we have a genocide on our hands. They're surrounded by Muslims, millions of Christians, and not a word out of the Obama administration. Okay, my Jesuit quote of the day is from me. Quote, "It seems wherever the Jesuits go, they create chaos and war, and the United States is their target right now." Okay, now, my opening monologue. President Trump this week signed an executive order putting a moratorium from anyone entering our country from seven Middle Eastern countries. There are essentially two views coming to the forefront on the immigration ban. I will present a third view, which is overlooked by everyone, a view that gets to the root of the problem. First, however, liberals say the ban is unconstitutional on religious grounds because it is directed solely towards Muslims. Secondly, conservatives applaud the ban, support the ban, saying it is needed to prevent radical Islamists from entering our country. But look closely. Both views do not question my third position, which is, before taking a position, we must consider who really created ISIS. It should be noted both mainstream views, whether conservative or liberal, assume terrorism as a homegrown Middle Eastern radical movement, never considering that ISIS could be a Western creation, funded by the West, instigated by the Jesuits, and molded and put into action by the CIA, Mossad, and other Vatican intelligence agencies. But before we go further, let's look at President Trump's order. And I say this to my Hollywood friends because they didn't read it, but let's look at part of it here. The President's order, enacted with the stroke of a pen at 4:42 Friday, suspended entry of all refugees to the United States for 120 days, barred Syrian refugees indefinitely, and blocked entry into the United States for 90 days for citizens of 7 predominantly Muslim countries: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. There are few exceptions to this order, including green card holders. When the executive order took effect, it is estimated that there were about 109 passengers from these countries that were already en route to the United States on airplanes. When they were detained at U.S. airports, protests immediately broke out. Attorneys flocked to the Kennedy Airport in LaGuardia. The ACLU filed a motion to have passengers released, many carrying visas or green cards. Then, in the evening, a federal judge in Brooklyn came to the aid of the refugees and others who were trapped at the airports across the United States. The judge's ruling blocked part of the president's actions, preventing the government from deporting some arrivals who found themselves ensnared by the president's order. But it stopped short of letting them into the country or issuing a broader ruling on the constitutionality of Trump's actions. What that means is people from the countries mentioned above will not be allowed to board planes or enter the USA by any other means for 120 days until a plan can be worked out to put into place extreme vetting to make sure terrorists don't filter in. Trump's actions immediately created a firestorm with liberals on the left, like I said, the Democratic Party, and the opposition mainstream, mostly liberal press. They claimed Trump was preventing Muslims to enter because of their religion, which they claimed unconstitutional. President Trump defended his executive order on immigration and refugee policy Sunday afternoon in 2 tweets, posted at around the same time the White House released a statement from the president. The statement stressed the importance of keeping the country safe and denied that the order amounts to a Muslim ban. But the tweets were more a direct response to criticism from senators in his own party, Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, 2 outspoken Republicans. The joint statement of former presidential candidates McCain and Lindsey Graham is wrong, said Trump. They are sadly weak on immigration. He went on to say these senators should focus their energies on ISIS, illegal immigration, and border security instead of always looking to start World War III. Those were tweets by Trump. Now, the purpose of the immigration ban is as stated directly from his executive order. And let me read the purpose. Its interior enforcement of our nation's immigration laws is critically important to the national security and public safety of the United States. Many aliens who illegally enter the United States and those who overstay or otherwise violate the terms of their visas present a significant threat to national security and public safety. Now, who could argue that? This is particularly so for aliens who engage in criminal conduct in the United States. Sanctuary jurisdictions, and there are 300 of them, folks, in our country across the United States, willfully violate federal law in an attempt to shield aliens from removal from the United States. And I may add, remember Kate Steinle, who was murdered and died in her father's arms on the San Francisco pier when an illegal alien who was sent out of this country 7 times was allowed sanctuary in San Francisco. That should be enough, I say, to change that policy. But these jurisdictions have caused, and this is back to Trump's purpose, these jurisdictions have caused immeasurable harm to the American people and to the very fabric of our republic. Tens of thousands of removable aliens have been released into communities across the country, solely because their home countries refuse to accept their repatriation. Many of these aliens are criminals who have served time in our federal, state, and local jails. The presence of such individuals in the United States and the practices of foreign nations that refuse the repatriation of their nationals are contrary to the national interest. Now, who could argue that, folks? Well, it appears the left likes those policies, likes illegal aliens to be roaming the streets, killing people like Kate Steinle, this young woman who died in her father's arms, and there are many more examples. So, this week, President Trump signed an executive order putting a moratorium from anyone, like I said, entering our country from 7 Middle Eastern countries. There are essentially, like I said, 2 views to this, and I went over that carefully with you. And let me repeat them. First, liberals say the ban, like I said, is unconstitutional on religious grounds because it singles out Muslims. Secondly, conservatives wholeheartedly support the ban, saying it is needed to prevent radicals from entering our country, radical Islamists. But like I said, my position is this. No one is looking at the cause of terrorism. No one at all. And that's really what I'd like to do. So let me say this on my position, the third position of getting to the root cause of terrorism. I believe the issue as presented to the American people without this knowledge will divide the country. It'll create chaos and perhaps a civil war. However, there is no answer, no solution if you stay within the parameters of the left and the right paradigm that were presented. If you do not understand how the hidden hand behind the scenes of government, and I say the Jesuits and their minions in government and all these secret societies, including the Knights of Malta, they want to dissolve America from within, leading towards their goal of a one world order and a one world religion, more control. Terrorism, folks, is now the war of Jesuit choice, and they have been preparing and practicing it for a long time. How can terrorism be stopped if it is created from within? In essence, it is a hidden government policy, not on the books, but understood by high-level officials, controlled by the Knights of Malta, the Jesuits, etc. So, let me explain, and let me go back to Rome, Italy, in 1982. That's my opening monologue, and I will go back to 1982 and present facts that show you that terrorism is something they were concocting back when I lived in Rome in 1982. Okay, so let's really get on with the show and keep on this subject. Now, I could go back to after the Second World War, discuss what we've talked about in the past regarding how the OSS meshed into the CIA along with Pope Pius XII, and get into that whole subject. But we're going to start in the 1982. Now, I think I've presented clearly the 2 views that are out there in the public right now. The left opposed to this immigration ban, and the right, wanting to protect our borders, build the wall, etc., etc. But my third view, I think, would change the ideas of many people if this view was allowed to be put out in the public. And that is, who really created terrorism? Now, I made some bold statements. The Jesuits working behind the scenes, Knights of Malta, our government at high levels, allowing this to go on, the CIA out of control, creating these rebel groups, creating terrorism in order to create the Hegelian dialectic, chaos war, so they can get their outcome. But people say, Greg, can you back it up? Where is your facts? Are you just reading them? Are you just mimicking others? Well, there's a lot of researchers that I've talked to a lot of researchers that I've mentioned their information, but the reason I believe this to be the case, and why I want to start on May 26, 1982, when I was an editor for the American newspaper in Rome, is that it changed my entire life. It gave me the reason to make these statements today and research this subject. And let me read the article that's on the web. You can find it. Just Google UPI May 26, 1982, Rome newspaper bombed. Now at the time, I was just a simple, humble journalist, covering stories every Wednesday. I'd cover the Pope's speech. I had no idea where terrorism came from. I had no idea that the Vatican was involved in our foreign and domestic policies. But let me read the story that appeared, and then I'll fill in the blanks. And this will give you the idea why I began this research. Now, communist extremists, this is from Rome, May 26, 1982, written by UPI, United Press International. Communist extremists blasted the offices of an American-owned English-language newspaper with the time bomb today, and what they said was a greeting for the hangman Reagan. President Reagan is scheduled to visit Rome June 7th in the course of his forthcoming European tour. The bomb wrecked the entrance hall and furniture and equipment in the second-floor office of the International Daily News at 7:40 a.m., but caused no casualties, police said. 5 hours later, a telephone call to the Italian news agency ANSA claimed a minor terrorist organization calling itself Communist Groups for Proletarian Internationalism was responsible for the blast. The American-owned Daily News also operates a private radio station in Rome. This morning, we searched and destroyed the American Daily News radio, the caller said. This is our greeting for Hangman Reagan. The caller signed off with the slogan, "Against all imperialisms." In recent months, communist terrorists have carried out a series of similar bomb attacks against connected institutions in Rome. The Rome Daily News is owned by American Robert Cunningham Jr. and has Americans on its editorial staff. An American editor, Greg Szymanski, and an Italian member of the staff had opened the offices only a few minutes before the explosion. Now I may add, I use Greg Anthony, which is my middle name, but my surname is Szymanski. They were on a lower floor of the building when the bomb went off. The bombers placed a time device and some pounds of explosives, and I know it was 2.5 kilos of dynamite inside the entrance to the office. And may I add, it was placed right beside the publisher's door on the inside, which was across from the door that I went down to the newsroom. The blast blew a hole in the floor, and firemen examined the building to see whether there was structural damage, and it blew out the whole hallway as well. Now, the newspaper will continue to publish, this is a quote, American managing editor Christopher Winter said, and I remember him. We have no idea who might have done this or why they did it. We have received no threats, and we have no enemies so far as we know. Earlier targets of bomb attacks in Rome included a downtown bookshop that sells the American magazine Reader's Digest, the Bank of America in Italy, and the Italian Chamber of Commerce in the United States. So, folks, that was the article in the newspaper, or in UPI, back in 82. So what I'm getting at is that led me to research. I asked myself, how could they get in there? Now, it's interesting to note that the bomb went off at 7:40. Now, they must have been staking the place out, because I usually got in there at 7:30. I was a little late that day, so I probably walked through that hall that I estimated, which would have blown me to pieces. I had about 10 to 15 seconds of leeway time. I guess they didn't figure that. I wish someone would have stopped me from going in. So I began to research who could have done this. It was a very secure building, and I said to myself, who are these terrorists? I'd been around this in Italy for a while. When I was there, I was watching this strategy of tension, the Red Brigade or the Brigata Rossa, and all of these groups. There were checkpoints, and when you live in Rome at that time, you were under this idea that these communist groups were opposed to America and Americans and this whole strategy of tension. So I started researching where it came from. To make a long story short, I had some connections there and did some research and found out that the funding of the American newspaper was rather dubious, and that there were definite ties to Western money and the CIA. So we have the CIA, who had access to that building, and funding coming with that American newspaper, to that American newspaper. From that point, I started to say to myself, I better keep my mouth shut, because I don't know who's who anymore. I was 10 seconds away from getting killed. It made me want to research this subject. So I started to dig a little deeper, and it led me to the P2 Masonic Lodge, which was then being also investigated because of their connections to the big, huge Vatican bank scandal, the money scandal that was bringing down Italian banks, that also put the head of the Italian or the Vatican bank under investigation for murder. That was Archbishop Marcinkus from Chicago, as well as he was being indicted for bank fraud, connections to the mob, connections to the P2 Lodge, which was headed by a man by the name of Licio Gelli. Now, if you've listened to my shows in the past, you know who Licio Gelli was. Well, if you look back at his history, he was a member of the Fascist Party and Mussolini, and he was always a double agent. And he became an agent of the CIA, paid handsomely, became a millionaire to basically control Italy, to make sure it goes into the directions that the American people wanted. So there's no doubt that Gelli was a CIA operative. Now, the strategy of tension in Italy was basically this. They were practicing terrorism there to use it at a bigger scale in the future, which we're seeing right now. Now, if you go back, and I'm going to get into in the second half hour a little bit more on Licio Gelli, and then we're going to talk about how a Jesuit priest named Father Paolo Dall'Oglio in Syria is basically a conduit for Western money going into the hands of rebels, which go into the hands of ISIS, and they're doing the same exact thing now, but on a larger scale, a worldwide scale. So I happened to be there when they were doing this in Italy, almost killed, and I researched it. And I found the connection to the CIA, found the connection to Licio Gelli, who had strong connections to the Vatican and the Jesuits, as well as the P2 Masonic Lodge, which also came out in the French and Italian newspapers that there were over 150 high-level bishops and cardinals who were members of this Masonic Lodge, which, if you read canon law, is immediate excommunication, which never happened. So, Gelli was the key figure here to get to look at. And his orchestrating, the money comes in. They create these phony, I never did find who this terrorist group was. And basically what it was doing was creating tension. The communists bombed the paper against Reagan, then money flows in, and you have this strategy of tension that they were practicing there. Remember the Bologna bombing? And now they're doing it on a larger scale, is my contention. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, let's get right back at it here on the Investigative Journal on this January 30th, 2017 day on our calendar. And I think if you listen to my first half hour, if you haven't, please do. I've given you a good idea why I got interested in what was the root cause of terrorism back in Italy in 1982. And what I found out was basically shocking to me. I mean, I worked for a newspaper that was controlled and funded by covert operations. Now, I believe that they were experimenting the strategy of tension in Italy so that they could use it on a broader scale now with ISIS and this worldwide terror, which is really a war in itself, spreading its tentacles from radical Islam to Europe and to the Western civilization, as I know it, with an intention of cutting the heads off of all infidels. Now, the point I want to make is, when you make the connection to the CIA, does that automatically transmit to the President of the United States? Do all of them understand it, or is the CIA out of control? So let's be fair here. Remember John Kennedy? one of his platforms was to basically dismantle the CIA, and probably one of the reasons he was killed. So the question becomes, does Trump understand what I've just said, this third view? Or is it an out-of-control group that are controlled by others, Jesuits as well, to manipulate this president or manipulate other presidents? Until we can make a firm connection, I think we have to keep that option open. One way or the other, my original quote of the day was, Jesuits seem to create chaos in war in whatever country they go, is backed up by history. And you can do that on your own. We've done it here for over a decade. So now let's get back to 1982. So I find out Licio Gelli, the head of the P2 Masonic Lodge, was a CIA operative, former fascist with Mussolini, and in fact probably a double agent, collecting millions and millions of dollars. Now recently he passed away, and if you listen to some of my shows with Leo Zagami, who knew him personally, I've had an update on what was Licio Gelli and P2 doing in the last 10 years, which has really changed a lot. So I can't spend the whole show on that, but go to some of my older shows. But really, to understand the sly activities of a man like Licio Gelli working for the CIA is to understand how the Vatican-led New World Order really operates, along with our government and this hidden hand. Now, Gelli was born in 1919, publicly known as an Italian financier, chiefly known for his role in the Bank of Ambrosiano Vatican bank scandal. He was also revealed in 1981 as being the worshipful master of the clandestine Masonic Lodge Propaganda Due, P2. But behind the convenient cover of a financier, Gelli's clandestine role for the CIA in the Vatican is virtually unknown to everybody here, like I'm talking about. He was also a good friend of the Reagan administration. Now, isn't that interesting? And was seen pictured behind the former president at his inauguration. So here we have Gelli fomenting terror in Italy, but is at the Reagan administration inauguration. A website called Forbidden Knowledge provides a good initial behind-the-scenes look at Gelli. And here's some information that I also uncovered. Now, every American should read that there aren't any doubt and I can verify through connections I had in Rome, that this man was a CIA operative. He was a CIA operative. Did you hear that? Any doubts that the Vatican and Jesuit order aren't involved up to their necks in the New World Order can be dispelled, because I know Gelli had high-level Vatican connections and Jesuit connections. But anyway, Gelli was the head of a 2,400-member secret Masonic Lodge, P2, a neo-fascist organization in Italy that centered on the elite. Gelli had high connections in the Vatican, even though he was not a Catholic. P2's membership is totally secret, until when I was there, stories were coming out with actual names, code names of people, Italian high-level and other bishops all around the world, and cardinals who were members, including Father Marcinkus from Chicago, the head of the Vatican Bank, and his code name was Gorilla. Now, Gelli was responsible for providing, now look at his past. He was responsible for providing Argentina with the Exocet missile. He was a double agent for the CIA and the KGB. He assisted many former Nazi high officials in their escape from Europe to Central America and America. He had close ties with the Italian mafia, close ties with the Vatican. Gelli was a close associate of Benito Mussolini. He was also closely affiliated with Roberto Calvi, head of the scandal-ridden Vatican Bank of Ambrosiano. Calvi was murdered. Gelli's secret lodge consisted of extremely important people, including armed forces commanders, Secret Service chiefs, head of Italian financial police, 30 generals, 8 admirals, newspaper editors, television and top business executive, key bankers, and high-level cardinals and bishops in the Vatican, including Calvi. And Calvi basically was killed. He was found hanging under the London or the Blackfriars Bridge because he was going to spill the beans. Now, Jelly and others in the P2 were behind the assassination, some say, of Pope John Paul I, who was in office for 33 days before the cyanide salesman John Paul II took over. Now, the central figure in Europe and South America that linked the CIA, Masonic Lodge, Vatican ex-Nazis, and several South American governments, the Italian government, and several international banks, was also Lucio Gelli. He, with Klaus Barbie, Heinrich Rupp, met with Ronald R. Rewald in Uruguay to arrange for the Argentine purchase of the French-made Exocet missile, used in the Falkland Island attack to kill British soldiers. Now, why is he so important? Now, to understand Gelli, you must understand the complex post-war years of Europe. The biggest threat to Europe in pre-war times was communism. It was the great fear of communism that gave birth to the fascists and the Nazis. Though both sides were dreaded, the fascists resented right-wing government, while the communists represent left-wing government. It was the right wing that the United States and the Catholic Church desired over communism, because communism would destroy the capitalist system. This was the Hegelian dialectic going on, created behind the scenes by the Jesuits. And if you research the Paraguay experiments, as far back as the 1600s, the Jesuits were practicing communism back then. They are the fathers of communism. Now, this is why the CIA, the Vatican, had to go through Operation Paperclip. The Nazis had massive amounts of Soviet intelligence, had infiltrated communist partisans, and were in no way going to give up to the Soviet Union. Gelli worked both sides of the fence. He helped to found the Red Brigade, and that was the terrorist group that bombed Bologna and killed over 80 people. Now, some people are saying that every terrorist event in America is a false flag. Now, I'll tell you what, I can't be sure on any of it, whether it was a false flag or people actually died, but I do know that the May 26 bombing in 1982 was no false flag, and I was 10 seconds away from death. That I know. So he helped fund the Red Brigade, spied on communist partisans, worked for the Nazis, at the same time a double agent. He helped establish the Vatican rat lines, which assisted, this is why he lived as a millionaire at the end of his life in this big, huge villa, which assisted the flight of high-ranking Nazi officials from Europe to South America, with passports, guest supplied by the Vatican, and with full acknowledgement and blessings of the United States intelligence community. Now, you'd think if we were playing, if we were actually fighting communism, we wouldn't want all these Nazis to come in. In fact, one of the biggest ones starts NASA. Wow. That's why I say my third option regarding this immigration ban should be out in the public. People would have a whole different view on this world. Now, while on one hand, the U.S. participated in the war crime tribunals of key Nazi officials and maintained an alliance with Communist Soviet Union, secretly, the U.S. was preparing for the Cold War and needed the help of Nazis in the eventual struggle the U.S. would have with the Soviet Union. Gelli's agreement with U.S. intelligence to spy on communists after the war was instrumental in saving his life. He was responsible for the murder and tortures of hundreds of Yugoslavian partisans. The Vatican provided support to the Nazis and fascists because the communists were the real threat to the Church's survival. The Italian communists would have taxed the Church's vast holdings, and the Church has had a dismal experience with communist governments, even though they work together with them, throughout the world, where, in a sense, religious freedom was stamped out. Gelli, you have to know, folks, was well connected with the Vatican from the days of the rat lines, and he worked for the American intelligence as well. Gelli formed the P2 Masonic Lodge, which did not follow the direction of the Grand Lodge, and was supplied with a sum of, they're estimating, $10 million a month by the CIA. Its membership was a who's who in the intelligence community, military, Italian, etc. So prominent was his influence, like I said, he was a guest of honor at the 1981 inauguration of Reagan, being right up there on the platform. Now, Jelly used blackmail in order to gain prominent members of his P2 Lodge. Its membership is estimated at 2,400 at that time, including 300 of the most powerful men in the Western world. He was this is what I'm talking about, this hidden hand. He was a close friend of Pope Paul VI, Juan Perón of Argentina, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and many high officials in the Italian American governments. He is also reported, although it can't be verified, to have had some financial dealings with George Bush, for the presidential campaign. Jelly and his P2 Lodge had staggering connections to banking, intelligence, and diplomatic passports. The CIA poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Italy in the form of secret subsidies for political parties, labor unions, communication businesses. Now listen, when I was there, let me tell you, that statement is true. American hands were all over Italy at the time. At the same time, the agency continued a relationship with the far right and violent elements as a backup should a coup be needed to oust a possible communist government. The covert financing was exposed by the Prime Minister of Italy in a speech to Parliament. He indicates that more than 600 people in Italy still remain on the payroll of the CIA. Boy, when I was there, they were all over the place. Licio Gelli was, they were on the CIA payroll back in the time I was there, during the strategy of tension when terror was being practiced so they could do it worldwide now. Now, Licio Gelli was an ardent Nazi and a perfect asset of the CIA. As a part of Reinhard Gellen's intelligence team, he had excellent contacts. Gelli was the go-between for the CIA and the Vatican through his P2 Lodge. Amazing, isn't it? When you start looking at this stuff. Now, Project Paperclip was stopped in 1957, when West Germany protested to the U.S. that these efforts had stripped it of its scientific skills. There was no comment about supporting Nazis. Paperclip may have ended in 1957, but as you can see, Gelli and his international dealings with the CIA in Italy, P2, Heinrich Rupp, with his involvement in the October surprise, the ramifications of Paperclip are still worldwide. The Nazis became employed by CIA agents, engaging in clandestine work with the likes of Bush, the CIA, Kissinger, who had full knowledge of these bombings and how they were being funded by the West, and the Masonic P2 Lodge. This is but one of the results of Operation Paperclip. Another umbrella project that was spawned from Paperclip was MKUltra. We've heard a lot about that. But a secret laboratory was established and funded by CIA Director Allen Dulles. Now his brother, or one of his relatives, is a high-level Jesuit, I believe at Fordham University. Now we've talked about what they were doing in Canada with the experiments on the Duplessis orphans, with Ewan Cameron, and what's gone on there with the genocide of the Native Canadians. But Allen Dulles in Montreal, Canada, at McGill University and the Allen Memorial Institute, headed by psychiatrist Dr. Monster, I call him, Ewan Cameron. For the next several years, Cameron waged his private war in Canada. What is ironic about Cameron is that he served as a member of a Nuremberg tribunal who heard the cases against Nazi doctors. When it was at its height of his drug experiments, Operation MKUltra was formed. This was the brainchild of Richard Helms, who later came to be CIA director. It was designed to defeat the enemy in its brainwashing techniques. MKUltra had another arm involved in chemical and biological warfare, known as MK Delta. The doctors who participated in these experiments used some of the same techniques as the Nazi doctors' techniques used by Dr. Cameron and previous Nazi scientists, including electroshock, sleep deprivation, memory implantation, memory erasure, sensory modification, psychoactive drug experiments, and many more cruel practices. So this whole idea of waterboarding now, folks, that we hear, and no torture used on the left is going crazy now saying Trump supports waterboarding. Look at the torture that's going on behind the scenes in the CIA to this day. But you don't hear anything about that because the left and the right, the people, the masses of people are so misinformed and being led by the nose by the very group I'm talking about here, the hidden hand, the Jesuits, and all of their strategy of tension that is now spreading worldwide. Project Paperclip, folks, brought us MK Ultra. Paperclip ultimately brought in key players involved in the assassination of the Pope. That was before John Paul II. The October surprise, the sabotage of Carter's peace talks, and great many other things still classified to this day. The results of Project Paperclip were devastating. They're still very far-reaching. And this is what you would expect from collaborating with Nazis. The research shows that the OSS CIA that was formed in the National Security Act, and we talked about how this was formed with the blessings of Pope Pius XII, in order to, CIA was there to figure out a way to raise money for creating rebel groups to fight communism, remember, and they can create the strategy of tension. So they went to Burma and started the poppy fields, using the techniques that Chiang Kai-shek used against Mao Zedong in China. And this, when the Burma fields and all the money dried up, they went to Afghanistan. They had to have a place to launder the money because you got barrelfuls. They were making millions of dollars an hour. Barrelfuls of money. Where are you going to take it? You had to take it to a bank. The best bank to launder it was the Vatican Bank. Wash it clean, and there you have all your money to fund these groups, which they're doing today, to fund ISIS. The research shows this. The same agency that employed hundreds of Nazis has been in alliance with the Vatican through various agency connections, such as Licho Jelly. The real reason why this terrorist group with the bomb, I bet, was put in by CIA agents and almost blew me away. Now, I think they knew, because they must have stalked that place to understand they didn't want to kill a lot of people, because if they'd have put that bomb in there at 9 o'clock, a lot of people would have died. So they put it in at 7:40, figuring I'd go through there at 7:30. I'd be down in the basement, away from the bomb. But I was late that day, and I always felt, wow, I wish somebody at the door would have stopped me. But they didn't. They figured, well, if we lose one, who cares? Now, so we have this alliance between all of these people, third world dictator countries. We have alliances with Pope John Paul II, a Vatican alliance. So what I'm getting at is this is the third option that I want people to understand. And if they did, the left and right, who are now arguing about this immigration ban, are so misinformed, because the major question is who created ISIS. Now, the last thing, I got only about 4 minutes, so the last thing I want to do today is say, well, Greg, what information do you have that the Jesuits are involved with ISIS? And we've done stories about Father Paolo Dell'Oglio. He's an Italian Jesuit priest who lived in Syria. He was called the priest of the revolution in Syria. He's been there for years, speaks Syrian, condemning the Syrian government and Assad, calling on the United Nations and the West to intervene militarily in support of the Islamic rebels. Now we know this. Now go back to some of my shows on Oglio, and I will do another segment maybe on tomorrow if I can't get to it today. But we know there's even a bill in Congress right now to stop Western funding of these rebel groups. Now we know Oglio was put there to be the conduit, kind of like Jelly was in Italy, to make sure that through the Western money they'd get arms. We know this is happening, and it would go into funding terror. So we have these rebel groups morphing into terror, so the terrorists are getting Western money and they're getting the arms. There's a bill in Congress to stop this. Doesn't mention the Jesuits in Dell'Oglio. And if you look at his story, he was the conduit. There were so many false rumors going on. He was there for years. He'd been kicked out by Assad. They said he was killed by ISIS. Then he miraculously shows up again 2 years, well, that was 4 years ago. He miraculously shows up alive. So I think if you understand how they operate, that's exactly what they're doing to us today. And the Vatican Bank, I am sure, I've had people on my show, are still money laundering money so that they can fund ISIS. Now, why would they even name that group ISIS? We understood that if you look at the obelisks in London, in Rome, in Washington, D.C., are a phallic symbol, and ISIS is a Greek or a goddess from Babylonian times, whatever country back then. We've done so many shows. And these symbols represent ISIS. That's why they're sticking it in your face. But people are so misinformed. They don't understand. You have to do your homework and realize the Washington Monument, why would it be a phallic symbol to some pagan god? The same with the Vatican. Why would they put that there in the middle of St. Peter's Square? And why would it also be in London? Now, there are many other obelisks all over the world. But these three really are striking. And they really tell you, I mean, is it a coincidence that they call it ISIS? But nobody in this, if you start talking to people, they're going to start rolling their eyes and go, yeah, sure. I really cannot go to Washington and stand in front of that and say that is a beacon of freedom. We've done shows about the Statue of Liberty as well and what that really represents. But the more important thing that we're talking about today is to understand where terrorism comes from, who is creating it, because just like that bomb that went off in that newspaper where I was at was an inside job, I believe they're doing the same exact thing today on a worldwide basis. The only questions are who knows, how deep does it go, and can you ever stop it? Now, if both the left or the right understood this story, the third possibility, they may have a completely different view about what they're ranting and raving about and arguing about, and maybe we could come together. Well, hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.